I am making another video here that is going to be more to the point and organized and a lot less ranting about my other hour and 40-minute video that I did. And it is about this PEMF device, which research began in 1980. And that brand or company is called Quantron Resonance Systems. I just have a picture here on it. I do believe, after researching PEMF now going on 8+ years, that this is still actually the best, even though it went to market, gosh, maybe it was 25, 20, 30, 25 years ago. Maybe some people would see that as sad from the standpoint that there hasn't really been anything better created that is so comprehensive systemically for so many conditions. But I still feel this is actually the best, and you'll kind of understand why this is still the best when you see exactly how much research was put into this, and also the fact that other companies can't necessarily copy it because of the patents in place. So nobody has really kind of surpassed or put the same amount of expenditure into this. It's rumored that there might have been somewhere around $30 million of clinical research put into this. I think once you watch this video and you see kind of the extent of, again, how much R&D went into this project and company in Germany, you might agree with that. I think, and I did some rough calculations, and I do feel that with the costs of research today, if anybody tried to kind of follow up and compete with this system, just even kind of doing their own research and trying to make it better, so to speak, it may cost upwards of 50 to 60 million in today's dollars, compared to what they were investing in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Of course, that is to also say that we have lost a lot of value behind the dollar, but also, fair enough, universities have probably quadrupled, if not more, the costs that they charge and whatnot for doing research. Anyways, let's get into it. So again, I'm going to try to make this video as straightforward as I can and break a lot of maybe what are complex concepts down for people. And even if you've been looking at PEMF devices for a while, I will say that you're probably still a little confused. And the reason for that is because what I find when I do all of my research, and I'm not just a researcher of wellness technologies, I do also sell as a dealer or distributor, usually many brands in a particular product category. In the PEMF category, I sell maybe 5 different brands, although I sell QRS maybe 80% of the time. It kind of just depends. It always is an appropriate thing for anybody, but sometimes there are some particulars where a person doesn't need to work on their whole body for a particular localized issue, if that makes sense. So yeah, when I'm actually doing some research between different companies and many different industries I'm involved in, what I do find is there's a lot of marketing information out there that is, yeah, I guess confusing, because it's aimed to try to convince the consumer of something, and it may not really be backed in science most of the time, and so consumers get very confused about what they heard somebody say. So we'll kind of dive right into it, and what I'm going to actually do here is reference the brochures, because they are actually quite impressive the way that they're laid out compared to other brochures you see out there. And just to reiterate my point, once you kind of see some of these brochures and the information that's in it, and of course you can always find me on healthhacksreview.com in the description below, or you can find me in my link on TikTok. If you request these brochures, of course you can go through them yourself. You'll actually see that it reads almost like in a much more scientific way, like a science brochure. There's a lot of citations, a lot of evidence-based claims, and kind of one of the best things I could recommend is, even if you don't pursue purchasing this particular brand, just take a review of the brochures, okay? And the reason I'm going to recommend that is because it's a really good kind of case study or example of what marketing materials, marketing/educational materials on a product should look like, especially in the PEMF category. When you then look at other brochures from other companies, honestly, you'll just be very shocked. at the stark contrast of difference. And I could certainly throw up, you know, a few different company brochures here. You know, there's a lot of different brands. Like if you go to drpollock.com, you may have heard of him. He talks a lot about PEMF. He probably talks more about just different PEMF brands than anybody. You know, through there you can find a few different PEMFs if you don't know of any, and then go on their websites, look at their brochures, look at their website itself. And what's the main difference that you see, the contrast between everything else, for the most part, is that a lot of their claims, usually 99% of them, are actually claims not about, they make claims about their device, and I'm talking about competitors again here, but they don't actually back it up with anything. And what they, well, let me clarify. What they do back it up with is generic PEMF knowledge or generic PEMF research in the industry, okay, itself, which is fine, you know, to mention generic PEMF research, things like that. But if you're trying to do your due diligence on the specific brand you're thinking about purchasing, right, or make an apples to apples comparison with something else, you can't really do that most of the time with most PEMF, because they actually don't make any specific claims proving, and this is again the majority of the time, not all the time, but the vast majority, about their specific device, okay? So if you kind of, and if you went, for example, I'll just list a brand for you. If you went to Pulse, if you type in Pulse XL or Pulse Centers or Pulse PEMF, it's one of the more popular high-intensity PEMF on the market. And if you actually find their research section, almost all of that there is not any actual research done on their system. It's usually just kind of citing generic stuff. So then if you actually carefully read their brochure and their statements online, they actually are very careful not to make any specific claim that their device will do something specific. So it's some people would think that's very deceptive, and it's mainly just because companies are not willing to make the investment most of the time, because it costs a lot of money, yeah, you need a lot of experts, and it's complicated to try to create these devices with some real scientific backing. So anyways, let's move on to QRS, because I've rambled on enough here. So again, research started led by Dr. Fisher, and he actually created this company a little bit later in the 90s called Quantron Resonance Systems in Germany. Germany, by the way, and Russia back then were kind of like the leaders in electromagnetic research. And both of those countries, their research single-handedly has led to so many different sorts of energy medicine, let's just call it, type of devices, electrotherapy devices, light devices, radio devices, from a therapeutic perspective or industry. And so they did a lot. They contributed a whole lot to you know, the field as a whole in PEMF. And yeah, that's why, for one reason, if you actually get on the website here on QRS.com, which, just so you know, is Dr. Daniel Bader. He is the main U.S. importer of the QRS systems, going on 20 plus years, and I work with him directly. So this is his website, and or the official U.S. website, I guess you could say. So if you look at kind of all this extensive research here, and it just goes on and on and on, and there's even more to this, by the way. This isn't even fully updated. They've continued to do studies even past 2001, okay? But you'll notice that a lot of these are in German and Russian, and so they were really working a lot together. There were some other researchers, of course, in different countries, and I'm about to show that to you in a second, how extensive the research team was, with, I forget how many it is, 14, 15 different scientists that were kind of like leaders in their field in their respective universities and locations and departments. So I do have studies also that are in English, and just if anybody's wondering, all these really epic ones that are in other languages, you can actually request those from the company to be sent to you. I believe that they will actually send them in German or Russian, but nowadays, and this is a project I plan to do very soon, it's actually fairly simple to have documents like that translated. There's many ways you can do that almost automatically. And that is something that I plan to do. So it's actually not too much labor these days. You don't need to hire somebody to translate it manually. You can do it in more automated fashions. So we'll get back to the PDF here. Okay, so the first important thing to understand here is the education that you'll see a lot about ion transport, okay, and also the patents that this company has around ion transport. Okay, so here's a little picture of a cell, and here's the specific patent that you can look up. And this is already kind of our first checkbox on why this device is in a different class than most other PEMF. Is it the only PEMF that has a patent that is, and I should be very clear here, a patent that is based around a mechanistic or a mechanism of action in the body that's therapeutic, produces a specific therapeutic or biological effect? Is it the only one in the market that has a patent? No, it is not. Although it's like 1%, basically. 1% of PEMF devices have a patent, again, that produces, it's about a therapeutic function. So I'm being specific, right? Because you could patent, the aesthetics or something like control panel feature that, again, isn't necessarily correlated to a therapeutic or physiological change, right? So I'm just being clear, talking about biology, physiology, right? Because that's why we're looking into PEMF. Okay, so not many actually have that. Why? One reason is because it's very costly, and you need a lot of super smart people basically to study what you're trying to work on and trying to affect the body and trying to produce a specific outcome. So you see that as a big kind of selling point with QRS. They mention a lot about their patents that they're very proud of, and they have actually successfully defended this particular one about proof of ion transport. They've successfully won, I believe it is 57 lawsuits since, let's call it, the early 90s. What does that mean? That means, and this should kind of be this should maybe blow a lot of people's minds, because of this being one of the main source of false claims that many companies make. When you are evaluating another PEMF device and they say, hey, we'll explain more of the benefits here in a second, but all these different benefits, health benefits, are because of the ability to influence ion transport, which basically affects all kinds of different cellular metabolic processes. Okay, so here's this is what PEMF, and again, it's these other companies, they carefully phrase it. They're always talking third party, indirectly, generically. So they usually say, like, PEMF affects ion transport. PEMF can affect metabolism, right? And PEMF can give you all these results. When you evaluate these other companies, you have to say and ask them, when you said this, did you mean that your specific device causes ion transport and your specific device causes this particular metabolic change, which gives you this specific benefit and this specific benefit? In writing, are you claiming that your device is linked, produces those things, and has that effect? You get what I'm saying? So I know it seems super strange and subtle, but I'm telling you, if you go look at the brochures and claims and websites and what sales reps say with these other companies, not all companies, again, but 99% of them. Okay, and I do know what the other companies are, if anybody's curious. It took me a while. I filtered it down. Any industry or product category, you always find a good few, not many, and sometimes you only find one good brand or good product. But basically, you have to ask them specifically for that. So in the case of with QRS, when they say, ours causes the ion transport effect. Let me zoom in here for a second. Okay, our PEMF. Here, where am I looking? I'm getting lost here. It transports hydrogen, calcium, sodium, potassium, chlorine, and magnesium ions. Okay? So, and they'll make that claim and testament in many places, and the reason they can say that is because they've got a double-blind study as well as a lot of additional studies too, specifically around the ion transport, especially protons, that they also influence. Okay, and you can still look it up, of course, if you want to read it for yourself. And by the way, it is very impressive if you want to be, just blown away by the research. So to make a claim like that, and if you don't know anything about patents or whatever, but if you're trying to make like a biological claim on a medical device or any kind of device for that matter, that it produces an effect in the body, it's actually, you really have to have very specific, undisputable proof of that. Okay, the patent office just doesn't give it out. Well, it seems like it has an effect, therefore we'll give you a patent. It actually is a lot of work to prove a specific biological or metabolic change from a device. So, yeah, so anyways, well, moving on here. So again, when we talk about, that's why when you actually look at other devices and they just say, hey, like PEMF affects the ion transport, which affects all these things and give you benefits. Literally, again, this is why reading these brochures, studies and things like that with QRS shows such a contrast with other things, because you literally actually won't read another PEMF company saying that you won't even see them say hydrogen, calcium, sodium, potassium, chlorine, and magnesium ions. They won't even list it out like that. You actually find over and over and over again that most companies try to be as generic and indirect as possible, but they can't be too indirect or generic, otherwise they just kind of lose like their selling proposition, and they just won't sell much of their mat because they wouldn't be telling you anything, you know what I'm saying, right? So there's like a balance where they try to allude to something, but without actually making a clear statement. Okay, but you'll notice that the languaging, okay, the languaging is always like very direct and matter of fact with quantron resonance systems. So if anybody's wondering, by the way, at this point, the price point's $3,995. I do sell it for less, but I'm just giving you a ballpark that for another thing that we back into here, why I'm going over the specifics and the mechanics here, the proof and the efficacy, is that may be a lot of money for some people, but there's also a lot of other PEMF priced similarly or a lot higher. Some of the most popular PEMFs are like $30,000, $40,000, and $50,000 and $60,000. So again, I guess regardless of price, you always have to do your due diligence, but especially if anything is the same price as this or higher, you really kind of should be expecting them to be explicitly clear and backing up their claims. Okay, so QRS provides marked increase of oxygen in tissues, the rate of oxygen diffusion rate by 80 to 900%, and energy molecules ATP are formed. So like, again, I hope you don't mind me teaching this, but we have to, because I'm telling you that researching PEMF is complicated for consumers because of these, really we could call it marketing deception that most companies do. Do you see that? And it comes down to languaging and these little particulars. And part of the reason too is because a company can potentially get in some legal trouble, not just by like the FDA and people like that I'm talking about, but the FCC. And you can also even just hire a lawyer and say, hey, I bought this device and they made this claim, and like it's not true and whatever. So QRS provides a mark. Do you see how it starts the sentence with the brand? I know this seems ridiculous, trust me, I know. QRS provides so this statement about 80 to 900, did they just make up that range? Talking about oxygen diffusion and circulation, stuff like that? No. See, you have to start to become good if you want to be discerning about, I spotted a claim. I spotted a company that made a claim. Doesn't that sound like a claim? Well, QRS actually is very honest, and they make like very clear statements, like this is obviously a claim, right? Okay, well, other companies, it's like you kind of have to like keep asking the question because it's almost unclear if they were making a claim, but they kind of are, a lot of companies, when it just seems not as clear. So like you will generally see a lot of companies don't make a statement like a specific biological function and then connected in the same sentence the subject with their company. It's crazy, right? But trust me, like go read some of these other websites and some of the brochures. It is not by accident, okay? Some of these PEMF companies, based on what they're charging, they're making millions and millions of dollars. You don't think that they could have good copywriters and marketers? Of course they could. They can hire anybody they want. So anyway, so then there's a specific study. So then if you're like, where did they pull that from, right? I would expect to see, oh, well, that's covered in explaining, and we'll get to it in a second. How does that happen? Well, we have to get into the endothelial lining and the microcirculatory system and the vascular system. We need some science. We need to know how those organ systems are affected, how the pulmonary system is being affected, right? And how it influences oxygen. And also, is there a study? Are there studies where they were able to get that number, where they were pulled from? So the answer is yes, yes, yes to all of that. So again, you should always, especially again if you're going to spend several $1,000s, you know, and it comes to your health, which is of course priceless. We need to immediately get good at spotting, hey, that's a claim. Oh, well, that's cool. Can they back that up? And then when they can, you should be super excited. Should be super excited. Unfortunately, most of the time you get let down in the industry. Okay, so I'm hoping that I'm dialing into details here because this video is more than just about this awesome PEMF device and the work I do, but I also want to educate you on the fact that yes, tediously, you need to actually keep asking these types of questions. Otherwise, I promise you, most of the time you will get deceived by a company and you'll end up investing in something that isn't what it claims to be. And what does that mean? Many times you won't get the benefits that you were hoping for. And I encounter these people all the time, and practitioners, because I literally advise practitioners as well. And many have buyer's remorse, let's just put it that way, especially if they spent a lot of money, like tens of thousands, on their PEMF system. Okay, so now I would like to, just before we move on to the next point, just educate you guys, because it is important. When a lot of people, you know, most people, when they're getting into PEMF sort of marketing materials or education or this or that, or energy medicine in general, there's a lot of other devices that do this, but they talk about cell voltage, or how the body is electric, quote unquote. That's really more electromagnetic, but they talk about this concept of the electrical field potential. So and this is a cell, by the way, that's a visual image. So they kind of allude to, see the negative and the positive here, that a cell in the cell wall is kind of like a battery, and it can run low on charge. And when that happens, you have all kinds of metabolic cellular dysfunctions. So I'm going to now dive into this because this is another major selling point of this device, because they actually can prove that they influence this concept, this metabolic principle, let's call it that, of cell voltage potential, that term. And I really would encourage you, please do Google that, because it's an important thing to understand about health. And it's kind of also like a principle. When you understand it, you can then look at other modalities and understand them better. You can also change your lifestyle and watch out for things that lower cell voltage. It is a major selling point that a lot of brands of PEMF like to talk about, including the ones that are $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. But interestingly, most of these companies cannot actually prove that their PEMF raise cell voltage or influence it. Okay? Now listen to what I said. They cannot prove. 99% of the time, not every time, but 99% of these PEMF cannot prove they influence cell voltage. Okay? So if you're being sold that claim, and especially for a high price point, you're being deceived straight up. Now, I'm not going to say that, you know, it's possible that some of them do influence cell voltage. I'm just being very clear that if you're going to invest a large amount of money, right, then you should obviously invest with a company or companies that actually can back up that claim, right? That's kind of obvious, right, that you would just want to go with at least a company, if you have the option, of course, that has actually proven it, right? And that's also from a standpoint as if you're using this for clients or patients, it's because then out of your mouth, you're in integrity also. You can say, oh, well, this helps raise your cell voltage and that helps reduce your inflammation, right? You can actually make a claim like that and it's actually true, you know, and you could use that on your website or whatever. You get the point? So it's also helpful from that standpoint too. So you can stay in integrity. Anyway, so who's this guy up here with the pipe? So this is a very important figure who is a scientist who's associated, you know, he's kind of like a legend, quote unquote, in the science field, and he actually is associated with this QRS project. His name is Dr. Robert Becker, and I will just mention him in a second here, but here he is. Okay, this is in one of the brochures. This goes over, here's all the participants and the researchers involved since 1980. I know this is like, this should blow your mind right now, because all of this went into this company and this device. But Dr. Robert Becker, he is over here. Again, this guy's super famous. He's not alive anymore, if you're wondering. But the funny thing, and I'll get it, he's the one who was probably the most influential on educating about this concept of cell voltage and the cell and being analogous to a battery and how it affects so many different things in the body. So he had a book that is called The Body Electric, okay? And where you may have heard about cell voltage, if you're not well researched in the energy medicine field or biophysics field, is from Dr. Jerry Tennant, okay? So if you Google Dr. Jerry Tennant, T-N-A-N-T, and so Dr. Jerry Tennant is also very super famous. I think he has a practice in Texas. So Dr. Jerry Tennant, if you type in cell voltage, especially on Amazon or other book dealers, you're going to come across Dr. Jerry Tennant's book fairly often. And Dr. Jerry Tennant, I appreciate that he has helped educate on this concept of how you can affect cell voltage on the cells with different types of, you know, direct current devices and PEMF and stuff like that, and it's like really super important. And there's other environmental factors that affect you in that way. I appreciate him mass spreading it. At the same time, the issue that I have frustrated me is in his book and his marketing and promotion of himself, he really did not at all give any appreciation or shout out or anything to Dr. Robert Becker. And if you read The Body Electric, Dr. Robert Becker's book, and then you read Dr. Jerry Tennant's, I mean, I wouldn't call it plagiarism because it's technically not, but it in many ways it's like a ripoff of his book. He didn't really add anything novel or unique, in my opinion, to the work that Dr. Robert Becker did, who really deserves most of the credit, okay? And then to be perfectly honest, there's this French guy in who's a researcher, and he did some amazing things even way earlier with some electromagnetic devices. And I was actually, and I forgot his name, maybe it was Rene something. No, maybe, I don't think that's it. Anyways, not a big deal, but Dr. Robert Becker didn't mention that guy. And that guy probably deserves the most credit because he was talking about it even way prior to him, you know, some decades prior. But either way, this is an important concept to understand, and this is, Dr. Robert Becker was on the QRS project as one of the researchers. Why I'm mentioning Dr. Robert Becker is because, funny enough, you will actually see other PEMF devices in their marketing materials, including one of the most popular ones that's like $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, that name starts with a pulse, the word pulse. But you'll see them talk about Dr. Robert Becker and cite how important cell voltage is. And you know how great PEMF is. Well, the funny thing is that Dr. Robert Becker had nothing to do with any of those other PEMF companies or devices. Okay, what he contributed his direct research to is to QRS with Dr. Fisher. Okay, he was directly working with this entire team. Here they were working with Space Agency in Russia. The QRS ended up on the Mir space station, and the Americans got introduced to it and got inspired to do the NASA PEMF studies. Okay, I believe they're still using it. The Russians are still using it on the Mir space station. In fact, one of the longest manned flights on that specific one, they were using the QRS. and we fully believe that they were able to stay up there longer than ever. I think it was 438 days, because they were using the QRS. So anyways, I just want to point out something that is in a stark contrast you will not see with other companies, is they usually do not name all of their researchers, because usually they don't have any. Most PEMF are just copycats of each other and reverse engineering other devices, and they don't actually do like anything fundamentally new, I guess you could say. But yeah, if you actually took the painstaking time to look up all these individuals, okay, at the different universities and whatnot, these are all like some of the smartest people in their respective countries in the field of energetic medicine and biophysics and stuff like that. So these are all contributors. They did lots of research studies. This is just like a big overview kind of like what countries were involved in clinical trials and research. Do you see this incredibly long, impressive list here? You won't find anything else like this again with other PEMFs. Now, I would encourage you, again, just to Google real brief on Dr. Robert Becker. He was, by the way, elected twice to be considered for a Nobel Peace Prize. Twice. So is this guy smart? You better believe it. He did a lot of things. Now, this is an important thing I do just want to mention here, because this is a crucial thing for you to understand about PEMF devices, most of them out there. Dr. Robert Becker, and he wasn't the only one, but he, back in the 70s, late 70s, he was working with the military on a lot of like projects involving radio and radar and stuff like that. He actually was one of the first people who had some like credibility and was kind of, well respected at the time, to actually blow the whistle on, guess what? Electrosmog. So the dangers of EMF. And just if you're confused, by the way, electromagnetic frequency is what EMF stands for, and everything is electromagnetic in our world, okay? So some frequencies can be harmful and some can be helpful. In the case of a PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic devices, they can potentially be helpful. I do believe many out there are actually not helpful, and part of the reason is because, so let me back up a second. Dr. Robert Becker is very knowledgeable, of course, starting since the 70s, on the damages of electrosmog, and he wasn't the only one then educating and researching this. All of that research went into QRS. They realized that actually they need to make sure that, let me back up here, they need to make sure that they would be buffering the electrosmog, okay, from the device. And I'm trying to see if they have the patent here for the influence electric fields, magnetic fields with low frequency. I don't think it's this patent, but they have another patent basically that has to do with how they filter out, it might be that one, but how they filter out the electrosmog, 50 and 60 hertz, which actually comes from the outlet. So you just got to think about this logically, guys. Where you actually get dirty electricity from that hurts you, one of the main sources besides cell phones and cell towers and Wi-Fi and stuff like that nowadays, but back then, before the age of those telecom, right? So back then, where would you get it? You would get it mainly, most people, from plugging something into an outlet, okay? And if that device was plugged in, then that device, if it was close to you, would harm you with that dirty electricity, okay? So they actually realized that, well, hold on a second. If we're actually going to influence cell metabolism, right? If we want to influence cell voltage, if we want to affect amino acids, 60 vitamins and trace minerals, all those different ion transport, 90 different vital substances, if we want to actually influence with our device all of these incredible functions in the cell, what happens if we have electrosmog, 50, 60 hertz, disharmonic frequencies, surging through the device, through the mat, into the person's body? What would happen? Well, they know perfectly well what would happen, just like they know today with all the gajillions of studies, be it cell phones or whatever. They understand now, and then that basically it influences or damages or interrupts ion transport. That's what electrosmog does. And it does a few other things, but that's one of the main, most damaging things okay? And like, for example, there's some great studies with cell phones. If you hold it near your head, it influences calcium ions in the brain, okay? It causes it to dump out of neuronal cells, and that causes a lot of problems. Calcium is so freaking important with the nervous system. So hold on a second, think about this logically. If you have a PEMF that is proving that it can do ion transport to give you all of these different benefits, or even just claiming to do it and not actually proving it, you then have to ask the question, what about the electrosmog? Is this particular brand remediating it, buffering it, filtering it, whatever the approach is? Because otherwise it's counterproductive, okay? So it's it's just as silly as me talking about a supplement and talking about the benefits of using a device or modality to improve your cell voltage, and then telling you that, hey, it's no big deal, if you want to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, right? Okay? It's no big deal if you just, want to eat, 5,000 calories a day and sit around all day. All of that's okay, if you want to do all those things and and just use this device and you're going to get benefits. These things are counterproductive to ion transport, okay, including the electrosmog, right? So it doesn't make any sense that other PEMF companies have electrosmog that's just blowing through their coils going into your body, because it's specifically counterproductive to the exact claims that they're making as far as the benefits of their device. So for some of you that may be frustrating, and it may be also mind-blowing, and it should be. The reason why, and there's many things, as you can see, that affect cell metabolism that we're getting bombarded with all the time. The reason why other companies don't educate or talk about how electrosmog, and nowadays it's a lot of different forms of it, why they do not reduce it with their device, other companies, is because they have no method of reducing it. In other words, these other PEMFs, they do not block or buffer, or whatever their method potentially would be, they do not filter out the electrosmog, okay, the harmful electromagnetic frequencies. Coming from where? Coming from the outlet that a device is plugged into. Because they do not actually do anything for that, and they couldn't even prove it anyways, or have never, then they actually don't talk about it. Why? Because, of course, why would you want to buy their device, right? If they actually like, electrosmog's bad and blah, 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 blah. They don't even want anybody to ask the question about, hey, if I plug this in, do I get dirty electricity out of it? Just like every other electronic device that you plug into a wall. Okay, so just to be clear, any time you plug a device, electrical device equipment, into a wall, that device, if it's close enough to you, will produce electrosmog, okay? So the only exception to that is if that particular company or device or whatever has a method to filter that dirty electricity, okay? So that is why most companies don't talk about it. So it's ridiculously hypocritical, it's completely counterproductive, and it potentially can be dangerous, okay? And when I say it potentially can be dangerous, I have a study from the University of Salzburg, well-respected university, and they have done a lot of research on leukemia and all kinds of great things. Not great statistics, but great research. And they found that childhood leukemia risk could be as much as 7 times higher if that child was using a specific brand of PEMF. And I will just tell you that the specific brand that they tested is probably the most popular, or at least second most popular device on the market that many people have heard of. And the crazy thing is that, and there's a video out there on this showing this, and if you contact me directly through my website, I'd be happy to share it with you. But there is, they said the 7-fold increase in leukemia because of the electrosmog happened just from would happen just from laying on the mat, laying just on the device when it was turned on and plugged into the wall, not actually running the program, like literally not running a session on it, but just laying on the coils with it plugged into the wall. Do you understand how that happens? Because there's nothing to buffer the dirty electricity coming up into the control box and coming through the coils of the mat. So that happens. So you don't even have to literally even run a session with most of these PEMF and you still get electrosmog. And then if you actually do run a session, it's even worse. So some of the biggest sources of electrosmog potentially is actually a PEMF device, unless it's specifically filtered. Now, so this device, QRS, this is a major selling point here, because when we understand one of the main ways that help us buffer all these things in our daily life, right, and help our cells to become more resilient and increase their cell voltage and restore proper functions to all these things. And again, that list of things can influence negatively all of these different aspects of cellular respiration, and you name it. One of the big selling points is that influence on ion transport. This is the only company that can make the claim they did that, proved it. They actually even invented and patented the device that could actually measure ion transport, just FYI, which is even more impressive. So, that's why, also knowing and proving that a device is filtering out electrosmog is needed, because actually you have no idea if you're getting any benefits, to be honest. In other words, even if another company was making a claim about a specific benefit it could give you, you have no way now of proving if that other device will deliver on that, if it also is being mixed with harmful or disharmonic electrosmog frequencies, okay, coming from the power supply, the wall. Okay, there's literally all the claims, if they even made any, go out the window. They only, if there is no electrosmog, then potentially those claims could theoretically be true. So one workaround, if you're listening to this and you're having buyer's remorse and you have a PEMF device, some other brand you're using, and you don't necessarily want to buy a QRS for whatever reason, then one workaround is you have to buy a battery, or what they call like a rechargeable generator. It's like a freestanding large battery that you can recharge. And that independent power supply, so in other words it's wireless, if you plug it into that big large generator battery, if you plug your device into that and then run it through that, then you can filter it, and then there's no electrosmog. The electrosmog effect, to not fully explain it to you, but basically happens when you get your power from the substation, from the power supply company, okay? So when you plug it into a wall, basically. So if you don't plug it into a wall, you plug it into one of those generators or whatever. Now some people can't do that if they have a high power, high Gauss PEMF, because it just requires too much wattage, too much power. And I believe that, I'm almost positive that most of the generators out there, there's independent battery generators, can't support some of those high intensity units in terms of the power that they need. So that technique or strategy will only work on low intensity, like low power PEMFs. And what's considered low power. So if you look at the measurement of the intensity of the electromagnetic field, it would be measured in microtesla or even picotesla. Okay, that's how you know. Now there are some devices that have like hundreds of Gauss, or are much stronger than that. So there's like a subtly in between zone where you could maybe get away with it as well, plugging into a battery supply, but that's just going to be your own experimentation. So y'all can obviously fully read and enjoy this brochure, but I think you'll all find it very refreshing, especially if you're just trying to like be your healthiest you can be. If you're somebody like myself that's always researching and comparing, all the great like health hacking tools out there and modalities, again, I think this is actually amongst the top 5 things, and depending on what method of action in the body, this is also number 1. And it just depends on what action we're talking about here, but they are explaining the bioterrain essentially in this section here. You may want to Google like why the bioterrain of the body is so important, because it has to do with the balance of nutrients and fluids and enzymes and all the different things that are outside of the cell and versus inside the cell. And depending on what's outside and what's inside, that and the cell wall, the ability to actually signal and bring things through, you know, transcribe specific factors and send them out of the manufacturing plant of the cell into the body, right? That back and forth. You just got to think about it like a manufacturing hub, right? And highways and roads leading to and from different areas, okay, or different organs, different parts of the body. So that's the whole like bioterrain sort of thing. You know, that's the main thing that everybody is suffering with, so to speak, whether you're a high performance athlete or just an everyday person, you know, with a major disease or whatever it is. So the system, if you want to actually optimize that, you have to influence the cell wall and you have to influence the bioterrain directly. And so you know, this is not the only one, but I would say that this company and this product probably has the most proven research, patents, etc. They have proven more than anybody to directly influence all of those concepts, the bioterrain, etc., more than like anything else, in my opinion. So that's saying a lot. What that means is this is kind of like a game changer for basically literally any health goal or health condition. So like I'll give you an example of why this is like true comprehensive systemic game-changing modality, the specific device. So like as we, you know, keep up with the latest and greatest in biohacking and health and wellness and stuff like that, we're always getting more and more and more information, right? Okay, well, it's easy to get overwhelmed, but that's where you kind of have to go back to the cell and you have to go back to that bioterrain I was telling you about before, and you always have to kind of like say like, oh, how do I optimize that level, right? So I'll give you an example. So NAD, okay, this is talked about a lot because they found it's so freaking anti-aging, and it's not just like, it does all kinds of stuff, but it's connected to cellular senescence, how long your cells live, inflammation, genomic stability or instability, DNA repair, all kinds of metabolic disorders, neurodegeneration. They found it connected to aging-related diseases, atherosclerosis, arthritis, and so on, right? It seems to be like, oh my God, it's like some people feel NAD is like the holy grail in a way. So if you supplement with things that raise the NAD levels, you know, they see a lot of benefits with all these sorts of different things. But actually, when you go and you read like each kind of aspect here, they're mainly talking about cellular functions, cellular metabolic functions, which is what I was talking about before. So then, you know, yes, you can supplement with NAD, and there's a really good company, you know, or you can do IVs, which are really expensive. But let's back up a second. If you ask the question of like, wait a minute, why are my NAD levels maybe not optimal? So then we're back to this. We are back to this, where we're talking about, well, your NAD levels are not optimal. And I could give you this example for like all these other, you know, supplements and how these other supplements work on your cells and things like that, right? Why do you need these things, right? You know, or why are your NAD levels low, or other factors, okay? Well, because of usually this common list of things. This is pretty all-encompassing. The only thing I would say that's kind of missing here is the mental and emotional stress factors, which, you know, many people would debate, many smart people in the health field actually trump all of this, are even more serious. But basically, you know, any type of stressors, let's just say anything that interrupts signaling in the body, messages, stuff like that, okay? So we all face equally, you know, a variety, a mix of environmental, internal, and external factors. So these, for example, can be things that influence your NAD, okay? And where is NAD intimately involved? You know, in all the research, where does it do all of its magic? It does all of its magic inside the cell and with the mitochondria. This is why, again, a QRS is so fantastically exciting, because they literally actually, in here, NAD is in this larger list here of different vital substances or different enzymes that can be regulated by these signals coming from this PEMF, and that actually is proven through the patents and studies. When you influence core cellular metabolic functions like this, why it's exciting and why Dr. Linus Pauling and Dr. Robert Becker and some other super famous people, again Nobel Peace Prize winners, have said such incredible things about the QRS, is because it basically means that you have a modality that has benefits for anybody, because it's affecting just, again, core cellular metabolic functions. And everybody's cells, for the most part, work very similarly, similar enough that basically they can get benefit. So that's why you see impressive, just a wide variety since the 80s of just all these different conditions, and you always see positive, significantly positive improvements in different types of stuff. You know, cancer patients and pain. It could be fitness studies, ocular diseases, Parkinson's, osteoporosis. There's cardiovascular related one, sympathetic nervous system related things related to the heart, and that just also affects your HRV. It's really just, and this is just a small sample, but you'll see just such like a large amount of things. It could be dentist, it could be wound healing, it could be all kinds of different things, how it affects white blood cells. So that's when you kind of realize as well, just looking at the studies, is even if you just imagine for a second and say, you know, okay, you know, these claims that QRS makes about, like, you know, it does this and this and this, what if they were just, you know, making the whole thing up, which is obviously impossible based on the legal aspects here. But then all you would really need to do is then just look at these actual studies done at the various, you know, hospitals and universities and you name it, and you see such positive improvements with so many things. It's like, well, wait a minute, how could it possibly improve all of these different conditions so well unless there was actually some very significant truth to this actually influencing these core cellular metabolic functions? So the last thing I want to say about the patents and also some of the core cellular benefits here is one of the aspects of, you know, having actual proof and explanation for things, and on the cell metabolism and ion transport level, is you can actually walk through in the metabolic sequence of exactly how the waveforms here will actually create and raise ATP, okay, and increase ATP production, okay. So why I'm bringing that up is because what we find even in the last like 5, 6, 7 years or more is this kind of new medicine emerging, and you'll see them at summits and all kinds of like leading edge places in terms of the latest education, is this concept of how so many things go wrong in the body, or everything is, you know, so closely correlated to how much energy a cell can produce. It goes back to cell voltage. And of course, the mainstream thing we hear about is that ATP energy molecule, okay? And if you're not producing enough of it, and the body has such a massive demand on it, especially the brain, then that is when we see cells react and they say, I'm not getting enough energy. Uh-oh. That means I need to make some metabolic changes. It adapts to survive. So what I'm teaching you right now is a crucial concept, because you could almost, if you wanted to oversimplify not having optimal performance, or having a disease, or it doesn't really matter what it is, all of these other different types of labeled conditions, and I mean like practically anything you can throw at me, all of those are due to changes in the cells, and the cells are adapting or changing negatively, let's just say, or less than optimally, in response to interruptions in their ability to actually create enough energy for themselves. Is that the only thing that can get interrupted, energy creation? No. There are other interruptions that can happen, but ultimately, all these different types of interruptions usually almost always lead to the cell not being able to optimally fuel itself at its, again, its optimal level, okay? So then the cells will adapt, and when you see these sophisticated adaptations, that's basically where you come up with then all eventually symptoms emerge, more complex changes happen in the body, and you have this condition, or this, or this, or this, and all these different labels. And that's also where you end up having 10,000 potential symptoms. And that's actually a rough number. There's like about 10,000 according to mainstream medicine. Okay, so this is where you end up with all these other little things. But that happens, those symptoms and those conditions happen much later on. It's after all that maladaptive effects of the cells. Okay, so you could say that a QRS is also a holy grail in many ways, because they can actually prove exactly how the device produces more ATP on a cellular metabolic level. And again, that is very unique. Now, are there other things out there that can help raise your ATP levels? Yes. However, if we're talking about like PEMF, and if we're even just talking about like other sorts of energy medicine tools in general, this is definitely one of the few out there on the market that can actually walk you through the steps and prove it, of again how you're producing more ATP. So like you could take again like a supplement like NAD, right, and you could actually produce more ATP. However, you know, do you necessarily, is taking NAD, is that getting to the root of the issue, right, or the root of the interruption? Not necessarily. Again, that's why it would be, in this case, in that situation, more advantageous to actually use the QRS versus supplementing with NAD, because NAD is something that is just one of the many different cellular metabolic factors. Okay, one of many things, and one of many things that can be interrupted. So you'd want to get more to the root medicine or root cause or root modality, so that way if you could influence other things, right? Think about this logically. If you had some interruption on some pathway, whatever it is, maybe you were low in NAD, maybe you were low in something else, okay? Chances are, if one thing's being affected, many other things are being affected. And the challenge, of course, is like, well, what are those other things being affected? It's really not easy to actually piece that all together. You could do a lot of genomic testing and whatnot, but you're never going to really find, and there's just not enough testing to do it really that exists. You're never really going to find all the other different things that have been interrupted, okay, with cellular processing. So then you got to think logically, like, okay, if I don't really know, but I want to have the greatest chance of influencing in as many interrelated or interdependent factors, metabolic factors and pathways, I would want to, again, stick with a modality or modalities that I know have a broad effect. Okay, so that's why I'm such a fan of this particular modality and this particular PEMF. So this is a very important concept for you to understand about why, again, this PEMF is so powerful on influencing cells and hormones and stuff like that. But this is also an important concept to understand because it actually will help you. There are other sorts of energy medicine tools out there and modalities that can have a similar effect. Not many, trust me, there's only a couple things, but there are some that also influence by sending a signal into the body, some type of waveform, okay, and that actually produces a cellular action. Okay, so do you remember in high school or whenever learning about the key and lock model? So like you have cells, right, and you got little guys floating around here, usually like enzymes or other sorts of substrates. It's the term that they use a lot of time in clinical studies. These actually fit. Do you see how it fits, right? Here's the lock, so to speak, on the cell wall, and here's the key, right? And here the key is plugging into it. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you remember that? So this is how, like, this is representative of literally any kind of cell at all. So you got these little like hormones or keys floating around, going through the bloodstream. They encounter cells and then they piece in here, right? Okay, so the important piece for you to understand, though, okay, because this is what influences every single function in your body, okay, like hormones, for example. Most people have endocrine disruptions. all kinds of hormonal issues. It's because of interruptions in these processes at the most fundamental level. Okay, why this is important is because the specific waveforms that the QRS produces, let me back up a second. Do you see the white space in between here? Okay, you're like, well, that's the screen, right? That's the picture. That's okay. So imagine this in the human body. So it's not that nothing is here. Okay, this is an illustration. The important thing for you to understand about why the QRS is so powerful, or why energy medicine in general has its effects, is because that's not empty space right there. Okay, so what's moving through that space? What's moving through that space is electromagnetic frequencies. Okay, so your body actually produces, and actually, to be honest, it's not just, well, yes, it would be electromagnetic frequencies. There is some quantum aspects here as well. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is that cells and cell walls, these things don't, in old school biology, their belief was like, oh, these little things and these enzymes and these key and hormones or whatever, they just kind of float around and bump around randomly. You know, oh, I found a lock. Oh, isn't that cool? Lucky me. You know, I'm just plugging in and producing something. That was how they used to teach it way back when. It was just like this random process. These things float around until they find a match. So when you actually understand that there's 10,000 enzyme reactions per second in the body, and it might even be 100,000. I forget what it is. It's something basically mind-blowing. You realize that based on the fundamentals, and I won't get too deep into it, but based on how all these processes actually work and are regulated by the immune system in a millisecond, it's not possible for, you know, these things to just be floating around and plugging into cell receptors. So, and there's actual research, of course, then in the field of biophysics, and they understand that actually there's all kinds of vibrational resonance and oscillation and frequencies that the cell wall, like the lock, is transmitting. And in the transmission, so that's why I said the space, there's actually electromagnetic frequencies of varying kinds floating and transmitting all over the place. And then you also have the transmissions from the nervous system coming from the brain and the heart, and sending and trying to organize and send instructions. All those things are moving through the space, so to speak. And these guys too, they actually also are doing the same thing, like echo or sonar, pinging all over the place, pinging. And that's truly then how they find their way, okay? That's actually how they're actually going in, and in an organized fashion is the key. It's not disorganized chaos, otherwise you'd be dead in a heartbeat, literally. But there's an organization here. So how do you organize like a quadrillion, bajillion of these all at the same time? Because you just happen to change your breathing rhythm, or you just happen to stand up all of a sudden. Well, that's when you get into basically the electromagnetics and biophysics and all that kind of stuff. That's how all of that is made possible. So that's when we get into, like, here's the QRS signal, which is actually a Fibonacci spiral. So when you look at the side of a waveform, like a sine wave or a sawtooth wave, when you see those examples by other companies, it's not, you're actually just looking at a two-dimensional side view image of a spiral. Isn't that crazy? So they're actual spirals, but when you look at the side of a spiral, it just looks like an up and down curve, so to speak. So this is the only one that has a specific patented, they call it an E-wave, Fibonacci acceleration curve, and it's because of the spiral, the way the spiral, the curve accelerates or moves. It's quite complicated. It actually most closely mimics those waveforms that I was telling you about before that move between cells, or move between the cell wall and to those other substrates outside of the cell, okay? So that ability of how you ramp up that curve, and it is the ability of basically vibration, okay, of how you create a vibrational resonance in the cell wall, okay? And if you do it correctly, what happens is you can influence what? You can influence all these guys here, and you influence these guys. So the goal of PEMF is to try to mimic and influence the waveforms that are always the vibrational waveforms that are always being transmitted through your body naturally, quote unquote, okay? So they're trying to trick the body or stimulate the cell. So that's exactly what we talk about here in this section. We talk about that key and lock principle, and that you can basically turn on those key and lock receptors electromagnetically. And what does that mean? Well, what they found is that in both this specific research on this device and also generic PEMF research, that they can stimulate, it's like sending commands. The cells, if you want to break down a lot of sophisticated, complex, super boring processes from a biological molecular chemistry perspective, all of those cellular life processes boil down to these types of commands. Cell, work, literally. Do work. Cell, produce energy. Cell, clean up yourself. Or cell, detox, right? Okay? Excrete wastes. And then move those wastes, okay? So, in other words, it's like commands. That's what's going through those wavelengths. So, within each of these commands, there's like a gajillion other commands that have to do with this, right? It's like a master program. So, this is basically what this waveform does. It actually will mimic or stimulate these commands, these core commands. And that's why then it's like a top-down model, a hierarchy, why then it can influence all the smaller commands below, right? Well, what does it take to actually detox the cell or release excrete? Well, it takes a wide variety of processes, okay? Oh, well, what if we just, got the cell to do this command, right? What if we just told it to do that and it listened to the QRS, it listened to the PEMF, instead of listening to the immune system? Do you get what I mean? It's an external technology, and we're trying to convince it that the immune system is saying this, okay? Why? And then some of you are wondering, like, why would we need to convince the immune system or the cells to do these things? Well, you would need to do it because of, once again, all of this and mental and emotional stress, okay? It's because when these things accumulate, too much stress, so too much stress in the body, that's why the mainstream medicine says, 90% of disease, right, is caused by stress. And some people interpret that like, oh, I'm thinking about like not having enough money or getting fired or emotional stress. No. It's anything that is considered a stressor, okay, to the body. Even actually exercising is a form of a stressor, except your body positively adapts to that exercise. But basically, when you have too much stressors for too long, or chronic stress, chronic inflammation, right, then basically you start to really severely interrupt signaling between cells that the immune system is capable of to regulate itself, okay? So that is why so it's kind of like a paradox. Like, if you end up in a situation where too much of this accumulation, or just even aging, starts to interrupt things like semi-permanently, how do you actually get the signal through to the cells? How do you reach the cells that basically need to clean themselves up? They are not receiving the commands that they need. Does that make sense? So that's why, now you can kind of see why PEMF is really exciting, and also why this brand is exciting, because these things do accumulate in most people and are responsible for all the ills and all the health issues that you see. There's not a lot of modalities that can basically override these things, basically. That's one way to look at it. It's overriding the damage, so to say, the interruptions. So you need a stronger signal or an external signal to come in and to be transmitted into different areas of the body, because the body's just one big organism transmitting all over the place, and some of those signals just never make it to the brain, or never make it to the thymus gland, or never make it to the heart, right? It's like there's missing signals. So here's an interesting statement. Only frequencies and intensities conforming to nature help without detrimental side effects. What are they saying here? What they're saying is that basically in this section is that a lot of PEMF actually have side effects, okay? And it's not something that a lot of them like to talk about, and a lot of companies don't want to talk about that because they also can't even prove that their device actually even works in the first place. But basically, yeah, you really have to get into the details of the exact waveform and how closely it mimics the waveform that is naturally going in between cells. So most of the waveforms that you see that are used by most PEMF are very unnatural, essentially. When you get into like a very soft curling Fibonacci spiral or wave, that is almost nearly identical to what your cells are using, and that is absolutely patented by this company, just if you're wondering if anybody else does that. So like this is one reason I'm also not a fan of using high intensity PEMF, because your body just simply does not even remotely produce that level of field strength in the body. And I know that some people get that benefit of reduction in pain with mid and high intensity units and even low intensity units. But there can be a trade-off to, let's say, reducing your pain, okay? There could potentially be disturbances in these other delicate cell metabolism processes. And if you're like, well, wait a minute, you know, how do I know if these other PEMF are actually, if there's a trade-off, right? I get these benefits, but how do I know if I'm having other negative side effects? Well, the answer is you don't know. You literally do not know. So there's a lot of people may have other PEMF, and you're listening to this right now. I can't tell you, and nobody can tell you, if you're having side effects. You could be disturbing other things that could lead to serious problems later on. Like, I'm not trying to create fear. I'm just speaking very logically. Like, you don't know, and I don't know, and the other companies don't know either. So that's again like another reason why I would suggest working with something like this device, where they can actually get into exactly what it's doing on a cell metabolism level. So I am, and yeah, sidebar comment, again, I am very cautious, especially of high intensity units, because it's just so friggin' unnatural to have such a high field strength in the body. These are the ones that you can almost feel like jumping your muscles. They're so strong. You know, and you can ask them the questions and you'll very quickly realize like they can't actually prove anything to you and tell you that there won't be side effects long term. So like, see this section right here, QRS effects in blood vessels. You know, this is again coming from like real in-depth research studies and specific measurements and instruments, and they talk about exactly how you know, you might prevent hardening of the walls, adherence of plaque, how you help hemoglobin to actually maintain its zeta potential, how you can help things to flow more quickly through the capillaries and stuff. This actual explanation right here, and especially the ones that say the QRS does X, Y, and Z, you'll never see really something like this that gets into real proven mechanics, even with something like the Beamer that basically has built their entire marketing around blood flow and vasomotion. You'll see more just like, yeah, you just basically won't see the how, the HOW. Like if you ask a couple questions deep and you're like, okay, well, like how exactly, you know, like this kind of stuff, how exactly in the epithelial cells and the hemoglobin is that actually having its effect to improve that vasomotion. You'll get information, but eventually you can only go so deep in terms of the explanation. And again, part of the reason for that is because they can't actually prove what they're doing, and part of that reason is because of the patents that are involved with the QRS. And interestingly, many people don't know, but Dr. Fisher, you know, who you can look up, he's been involved in countless studies in general, clinical studies. But you know, he actually was involved in the creation of the first generation of the Beamer, and he was actually, some of his research, and he was involved in some of the first generation aspects of the IMRS as well. But that's for another video. And they did actually, these companies ended up changing a lot of things because they realized that Fisher had patents associated with some of those things, and well, anyways, I won't get into it on this video, but if anybody has any questions about those, just reach out. So first thing is you want to signal a waveform that's very closely organic, so to speak, like your body's own waveforms. Well, what does it say here? Natural frequencies of the system, only a multi-frequency spectrum can be used biologically. What are they really saying here? Because they don't explain it at all very well. What they're showing is like some of the main, and they could break this down further, but some of these main functions here, which is a conglomerate of like, gosh knows how many, 50, 60, 100 other processes. Okay, so these overarching functions in the body, here's the general range. And this is a simplified diagram taken from something more technical, but here's the full general frequency range in hertz, okay, that all these different processes function on based on the biological cell signals, okay, throughout the body, the immune system, and so forth, okay? And it covers basically almost all the important functions in the body, okay, metabolically. So again, what are they saying here? What they're saying is that for a PEMF to not be disruptive to your body, okay, to not be disruptive, okay, maybe disruptive to this area or some aspect of this or whatever, it actually needs to have a full range, okay, of frequencies that mimic very closely the body's natural range of frequencies as well, okay? It needs to be multi-frequency spectrum, okay? And so let me give you an example. So like there may be a PEMF that you're evaluating that produces a square wave. Square wave is like completely unnatural to the body, or it even could be a sawtooth or whatever. So you have some other PEMF, right? But usually what you'll find is that that PEMF focuses on specific programs. And if you look at those programs, say I select program number 3, okay, with some other PEMF for some supposed help with some condition, okay? Well, they may have gathered a couple frequencies like this hertz and this hertz, right? I mean frequency by hertz, not that it actually harms you, but a couple hertz frequencies they found in some generic PEMF research. Now they put it into their device, okay? Now they're broadcasting a waveform that is very unnatural to the body's waveforms, and they're only producing a couple frequencies, let's say in one example, or maybe even like 6 frequencies. Well, yeah, there's some that maybe go that high. The point is we're talking about a huge amount of frequencies across the whole spectrum in the body that actually really ideally need to be produced to not imbalance things. So some people are questing and looking for a specific benefit with some PEMF, and they work with like 1 or 2 frequencies. Like some will use like 10 hertz, for example, and just irradiate or broadcast to your body 10 hertz, 10 hertz, 10 hertz, okay? Sometimes it might flip to like 7.5, whatever, you get the point. So just sending 10 or 7.5 in that example for 20 minutes, that can actually be disruptive. Could you actually heal, say, a soft tissue injury 3 times as fast by broadcasting 7.5 and 10 hertz? Absolutely, because there's research showing that. However, is it potentially interrupting in your body other processes that use other spectrums? Absolutely, it's possible, because you're bringing in a very dominant over broadcast, basically an oversaturation, and especially depending on the strength, the Gauss, or how high the Tesla is, how high that field strength is throughout the body. Because even when you treat a localized area, it's actually broadcasting through your entire body, being carried through several mechanisms, the nervous system amongst one of them. So yes, can you see a specific benefit with some random PEMF device or something? Absolutely. But it is very unsophisticated generally when you get into the waveform and the frequency that they're broadcasting. It's usually like 1, 2, or 3 frequencies, and that's it. And that over time can absolutely cause imbalances and other problems. So this is an important concept to understand, and the reason why most devices don't have something like this, it's so multi-frequency spectrum, is because you need a lot of geniuses and a lot of money to basically, a lot of research to basically, produce something that is so multi-frequency like this. It's just a huge amount of work. And that's why they spent so much money. And they basically just went frequency by frequency. And there's some other little tricks too in terms of the waveform, but I'm not going to get too sciencey on you. But I think you kind of understand what we're talking about here. You may see, by the way, some other PEMFs out there that like talk about EEGs, right? And they talk about like biorhythms and stuff like that. So interestingly, when you actually get into these other devices that talk about like how they're mimicking biorhythms and stuff like that, they once again break down into programs, and they generally are having only a couple sample frequencies, okay, that fit into that range. So we're back at the same thing that point I was illustrating before. You know, they might have like a program that you run, you know, later in the day, okay, that's like more representative of an alpha range when your brain is starting to kind of wind down a little bit. But then when you say like, okay, well, what are the frequencies inside of that program, you know, that I'm doing later in the day, that's like more in the alpha range, then you'll find out that not only is the waveform itself very unnatural to the body's waveforms, but it also is just usually a couple frequencies. So you once again get an oversaturation or a dominance of something that is not multi-frequency. Okay. I just had to point this out, but because we've all probably seen this before, this is like dark field microscopy talking about clumping of blood cells, then unclumping, and that has to do with the zeta potential, ZETA, that causes the unclumping or the ability of blood cells to repel each other. So everybody's seen these, right? Because there's a lot of companies that sell their devices, especially in the energy medicine field, and some supplements and stuff like that, and they make these claims. Sometimes they're true, most of the time they're not. And we go back to the same questions again. So if you encounter this being used by some company, say in the PEMF field, and they say, hey, like, we unclumped the blood, check out this before and after photo. The first thing you say is like, well, where'd you get that photo from? That's usually how you find out it's BS. Number two is, that's cool, you're unclumping blood, you know, due to restoring the cell voltage and zeta potential of the epithelial cells versus the red blood cells. That's cool. Okay, but can you prove and show me the mechanics of how you're restoring the blood to that? The answer is no about 99% of the time. So that's how you know it's BS. So these types of dark field images have been used for a wide variety of different devices over the last few decades to try to sell product, but only very few can actually prove that this is actually happening. And I would just say that this device, if you're still listening to this long video, this device we found recently to be excellent at helping to reverse damages from, I'll spell it out here so my video doesn't get censored, VAXX, and different types of VAXXs, but also especially ones related to COVID. Okay, so one of the effects of those is that it causes a lot of clumping of the blood, and it can cause some serious problems, amongst a lot of other crazy things that are in there that the body has a trouble excreting and detoxing from. Well, we've seen really great turnarounds in just literally a matter of weeks with people using the QRS. I have a whole protocol for people that need to recover from those types of damages. You can always reach out to me at healthhacksreview.com. But basically, you know, we can literally say, well, if this is happening to somebody, this clumping, because of getting one of those experimental drugs, experimental procedures, then we actually legitimately have a device that we know 100% will reverse that. So a lot of companies can't make that claim. So do we need to do a study on somebody who got that experimental drug and had this effect to prove that it works? No, we don't. Because we already know how this works. We've already proven that this works and how it works on the red blood cells, regardless, because there's many things that can cause this clumping, okay? Many things. We're back to those stress factors, okay? This device works on all of the stress factors that may lead to this, okay? So yeah, we've seen some incredible turnarounds. I'm throwing that out there because probably all, maybe at this point, and we will over the next couple of years, know people, or maybe even practitioner, that have had some nasty side effects. And we certainly know a lot of people in general that have this happening in their blood from all those other stress factors. So this is super important to know, and is related to the studies talking about more oxygenation and better circulation, stuff like that, because the red blood cells deliver all your other organs and tissues so many important nutrients, amongst, of course, oxygen. So this effect alone is worth buying this device for. Just wanted to point out something impressive here. Like, there's way more than 21 illnesses that have been tested in research. This isn't really that updated, but I just kind of want to point out, like, this is an overview. This thing is so wide in terms of its therapeutic efficacy. It's truly incredible. And when we get into actually the treatment guideline brochure, which means you can actually look up specific conditions and stuff like that, I mean, this is almost like the nail in the coffin in terms of why I would go with, more evidence on why I would go with this PMF over anything else, is because look at this term that they're using right here. Now, you may not know this, but now this device is not FDA cleared in the United States, but it is cleared and certified, has all the certifications and everything, as a medical device in all, like, multiple European countries, pretty much all of Europe. So that is something that you can look for. FDA is like a ridiculous organization, in my opinion. But when you are reviewing PEMF, you should at least, ideally try to go with something that has something overseas that has to do with jumping through all the hoops, right, and proving therapeutic efficacy that is related to, getting some approval as a medical device. So yeah, in all of Europe and Germany and stuff like that, it's considered a medical device. That's why they are using this word right here, and they're not that afraid to use it, okay? Because that is a no-no word according to the FDA if a device is not cleared as a medical device, okay? This term gets you in trouble, all right? And even actually using that term as well. That's why generally when you're looking at brochures from other PMF companies, they would never use that term. Never, ever, ever. All right, and so that's why we're saying, like, oh my gosh, not only are they using that term, but look at the other no-no word they're looking at right here, right? Literally, actually, if I used this term up here, and then I used this term here, or some of these other ones, literally Google would flag and censor and monitor, and I'd probably lose traffic and all kinds of things, okay? That's how crazy it is at this point and how they share information. So you'll never, ever really see in other PMF brochures, guidelines, whatever, them laying out specific protocols of treatment for all these sorts of different things, okay? You just will not see this. It's very impressive, and you're like, oh, did they just, like, hyperthyroiditis? Hey, how about we just, like, I don't know, we'll just have them do this and make it up, and we'll do 8 minutes, and it'll probably work. Like, did they just make this stuff up? No, this is actually coming from the research. So that's what's really exciting about this. They didn't sit around and dream these setting ups and protocols. They're only mentioning things that's correlated to research where they know you'll get results, okay? So super impressive, right? I mean, just literally looking at this one thing should be enough to convince somebody to go with this over anything else. So yeah, a lot of different conditions. So it's got a wide therapeutic efficacy. And yes, you can absolutely use this on equine. You can use it on your animals, and it's amazing for your animals. Animals, on a cellular level, they're pretty much almost identical in terms of a lot of the cellular metabolic functions, okay? Beamer, for many reasons, has loved to copy, from a marketing perspective, what QRS has been doing. Last thing that I want to touch on, and before I end this video, is when you're reading, one thing, don't get confused when you see, do some deeper discerning, I should say, when an influencer in the health field recommends some kind of product. Depending on what that influencer's background is, that's one thing that you first want to look at, and see like, yeah, just like what kind of background do they have in health, and what's their research like and stuff like that. Most endorsements are just just a endorser influencer trying to make some kind of money, or as an affiliate or something on the back end, to put their name ascribed to something. And sometimes it actually means something. It just depends. But what I find as far as like testimonials or endorsements, the ones that mean the most to me are the ones that are given by some sort of, let's say if we're talking about the health field, some person who has some real extensive accreditation and background, especially ideally in a relevant field to whatever the modality is. I mean, if they're giving like a testimonial or making a statement or endorsing it, obviously that means a lot more. And this QRS honestly has so many impressive endorsements, and also like statements and testimonials, that in my opinion, it's honestly enough to purchase it just based off that alone, which is obviously ridiculous. I wouldn't normally say that about most things, but like I'll give you an example. Like Dr. Linus Pauling, who is a double Nobel Prize winner, founder of orthomolecular medicine, and if you actually look at all he has accomplished, most scientists, researchers, etc., they are not even close, not even remotely, to how much this guy accomplished in his time. Truly brilliant. Okay, we owe him a lot in the field of health and medicine, and this is his statement. And he, by the way, was working on the project as well. He contributed his amazing knowledge. QRS is one of the most important discoveries of the physical medicine in the last decades, and the benefit for mankind from infant to geriatric. I mean, could that statement possibly be like a more grandiose, more powerful, all-encompassing statement? I mean, think about that. And that came from him. Like literally, if I saw him say that about any other product, I would buy that product. I would literally, as long as I knew he actually said that, I would literally do no further research on some other product if I just saw that he endorsed it like that. I would just buy it immediately and start using it. And part of the reason too is because a guy like that, and also Robert Becker and all these people, they just don't normally even endorse products or say anything about products out there. If you go looking, it's rare to ever run across that. So it's quite a profound statement. That means a lot to me. Okay. And again, same thing, Robert Becker here, that everybody loves to talk about, in their marketing materials, another profound statement here. He's basically saying that, because this was a medical device overseas and still is, this is the biggest contribution, or a huge one, for orthodox medicine. Opens up new healing abilities and makes them come true. I mean, he's trying to be as broad as possible, because all the things that they saw happen in all the research is just like, man, like how do I even like simplify and make a profound statement to somebody so they understand the gravity of the situation, how this is a medical breakthrough in a way. Okay, so anyways, and I will say even this, like, there's a quote here by Dr. Fisher, and about his own device. Is it biased? I don't think so, because if you actually, you always have to look at what this person has accomplished, who said what, and then you'll see that, oh my God, Dr. Fisher, man, how did this guy even have the time to do so many clinical studies? I'm not even talking about on QRS and PMF research. I'm just saying this guy's all over the freaking place doing super in-depth research on the body in studies. He is so accomplished in doing studies. And, there are 326 diseases, there are only ill cells. It's like what Louis Pasteur said on his deathbed. It's not about the pathogen, the infection. It's about the bioterrain, which is the health of, basically he's saying the same thing here, right? So his whole prerogative is, how do I take on 326 diseases? How do we take on all of them at the same time? Well, we have to restore a proper cell function. So is it fully sinking in here how profound this modality is? This guy, well-known director here at a prestigious place in oncology and immunology, the QRS restores the rhythm destroyed by the disease and returns us back to life. Oh my God. So, like, even if you get to the most cutting-edge levels of what they're talking about these days, you actually will find very little talking about like how do you restore interrupted autonomic nervous system, enzymes, other pathways, functions metabolically after somebody has been through major diseases. I mean, even like COVID, long haul sort of symptoms and stuff like that, right? How do you just restore all of these normal biological metabolic rhythms after these serious things? That's a pretty direct statement. The QRS does that. It does that. It's not like it may do that. It can help support that. It does that. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it's very direct, and that statement is from him and from his place and multiple other places looking into these various diseases and research done with this device. It's a statement that's backed up by research once again. So I've been nailing these points home over and over and over again because honestly, why don't you go ahead and look at all the other PEMF for a second out there, and why don't you go find who endorsed these things, who actually was involved in the research, what kind of testimonials. Is it some random testimonial from nobody in the middle of nowhere? Who made a testimonial? And then just compare this to other PEMF based on even just testimonials and endorsements. Do they have anything from the Euro Space Agency? Do you see what I'm saying? So this is light years beyond anything else. And if anybody finds anything that they honestly think is even remotely comparable that I don't know about, then just please get in touch with me. Let me know. I'm always learning. And if anybody just wants a good deal or wants to try this out for 6 months return window, that is available. This one has a 6-month return window because they know that only 1 to 2% of people return their QRS. So it's absolutely incredible. Anyways, thanks for watching.